Welcome to another installment of the 007 Files. This is the start of our third season. I'm Bill Koenig, along with my co-hosts, David Leigh and Javi Trujillo. Gentlemen, we're coming off of like a 4-week break from doing the podcast. Was it time well spent for you?
Time well spent? I don't know what that means.
You were on the beach. It's time well spent.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I got a lot of reading done, not as much as I would have hoped. I still have like 4 James Bond novels, or Bond-related novels, that I'm still working through. I played that Hitman Le Chiffre level quite a few times before the free trial of it expired, so it was nice to get back into the video game Bond swing of things.
I think they're bringing it back in September, aren't they?
I think so. I noticed that I can buy it, I think, for like $5 right now if I wanted to play through it again.
Well, today, our guest is Joseph Darlington of Being James Bond. He took a book years ago and turned it into a brand with podcasts and YouTube videos and other things, but he's returning to his roots with both an expanded Volume 1 and a new Volume 2. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, my name is Joseph Darlington. I've been doing the Being James Bond podcast for 18-ish years now, maybe more. I kind of lost track. But yeah, so I've been doing that podcast for quite a while. Wrote a book a long time ago, and finally getting around to writing the follow-up as well as an expanded edition of the first volume. So thank you so much for having me, guys. It's great to be here again.
Yeah, one thing, Joe, I think you were the first ever Bond podcast I came across.
Really?
But it was, I think it was just after Quantum of Solace, something like that. I don't remember exactly when you started. And I don't know how I found you. It's maybe that I was just looking for it on iTunes or something like that, just looking for Bond-related podcasts, and I got it. And I just went through it episode by episode by episode because you had a ton of episodes out by the time I found you, and it was brilliant. And the thing is, I'd actually been thinking of doing a podcast by turning some of my website content into podcasts, and I thought, I'm not going to bother because I don't think I can compete with this quality.
Well, I appreciate that, David. Thank you. Yeah. So I did start it. It was literally, I'll never forget. Like, it's a very easy date to remember because I put the first one out about a week before the release of Casino Royale. It was something that was sort of brewing during the Brosnan years, and it was sort of right up just before Daniel's first film that I launched. So probably great timing on my part, not anything I had planned or thought through, just got lucky. And I'm not the longest running. I wasn't the first. There was 1 or 2 podcasts that were out at the time. But I think just by kind of withstanding the test of time and not kind of having the sense enough to retire, I've kind of gotten the I'm allowed to call myself the longest running podcast. So
yeah.
Again, not by talent, just by sheer doesn't know when to quit.
Well, that counts for a lot. I think that counts for a lot. It's I think you said 18 years, and I think that's really impressive.
I guess it's got to be 19 now. So next year will be 20 years. Good Lord, I'm showing my age.
I think we all are.
Joe, let's just start briefly. It all began with the Volume 1 of Being James Bond. Describe what the general idea was. In other words, it's essentially, okay, you want to be James Bond, here's what you need to do, but you go ahead and tell us about it.
Yeah, and it's funny. So, funny story. I had been doing my podcast for a couple of years, and I would always look at iTunes and see the reviews, and the reviews were always wonderful and glowing. And once I put the first book out, I got my first negative review. Most of them were good. I think all of them were good except for one, and I'll never forget it because the reviewer wrote, the author misses the point. To which I kind of thought, well, that's kind of a strange comment. How do you know what my point is? Like, I'll tell you what my point is. So the bottom line is that I think he was looking for something more akin to, having confidence and talking to girls and all that kind of good stuff. And I was like, nah, not. I'll leave that for other people to tend to. Yeah, my angle was that I was always fascinated with James Bond for a multitude of reasons, but one of the things that always struck me was that he was a guy that was incredibly competent. I mean, you could just, whatever you invited him to do, whatever the challenge would be, he knew how to do the thing. Whether it was playing a game, whether it's a gambling game, whether it's a social sport, whether it's an extreme sport, knowing his way around different places, driving certain things. I mean, there was basically nothing you could ever challenge him with that he couldn't beat you at your own game. And so the fascination sort of became, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff to have to sort of know and learn. So it really became a kind of a challenge to see, like, can one man know all of these things? So I really kind of set out and said, I want to try to study for myself, learn for myself how to do all of these things. And I certainly wouldn't say that I'm now currently an expert on every single thing James Bond has done, but I've certainly done my homework and tried to learn it the best I can. Most of the things that I write about in the first I think all of the things in the first book I've at least tried, even things like flying an airplane. So I've tried it, and but yeah, that's more akin to what my angle was that I was really just fascinated with the concept that James Bond can do literally anything. So I said, okay, let's put this to the test and see if you could really learn these things. And I figured with a few volumes of different books, I could really dive deep into some of these things. And again, if these are things you want to know, I'll try to make it simple to learn, easy to understand. If an idiot like me can figure it out, then you can figure it out. So yeah, and again, it's been a lot of fun, but that's kind of how I sort of tackled this.
At one point you promised a volume 2, but real life has a way of altering your plans. It's happened to all of us. So you decided at one point, relatively recently, I'm going to do volume 2 like I promised. But there was a complication. You couldn't just do volume 2. You had to go back and reopen volume 1. What was involved with that?
Yeah. So, right. So it took me forever. And like you said, it's kind of when life is not tugging at your apron strings, try to really sit down and knock out all of the chapters that I had planned for volume 2. And after, years of pecking at the keys when I can, suddenly I said, okay, I think I just finally finished the last page of the last chapter. So I think I'm ready to go. And so, yeah, and I kind of looked at volume 2 and it really did make me kind of have a little crisis. And I looked at volume 1 again and I said, I don't think I can just pop out of volume 2 without addressing the fact that several years have passed since this first book. So I kind of feel like it's, I kind of owe it to people to readdress the fact that it's been so long. And yeah, I just looked at the first book and I said, well, a couple things. First off, it was smallish, because despite the fact that I thought I get kind of ridiculously extensive, involved in a lot of the topics, I kind of felt like I was kind of going by, because I had first started out doing a podcast, and the podcast makes you be conscious of the time that you're spending. So basically, I kind of thought maybe I didn't spend as much time on these subjects as I might have liked. The other thing that stood out was that there had been 3 whole movies since the first one came out. Skyfall, Spectre, No Time to Die, they've all been out since the launch of the first book. And I thought, I don't want to just let that, I couldn't just let that lie. I did a chapter on London Bond locations, and I thought we've had 3 films that were essentially love letters to London. in the UK. So I said, I really have to go back and revisit that. So there were a few places in here where I really did flesh out, and things got a lot meatier since the first volume. I did an entire section in this on Switzerland and Piz Glorias because I went to the Piz Gloria event in 2019. It was phenomenal, and my experience had grown so much, so I wanted to revisit that. So yeah, I felt like I couldn't really rest on my laurels and just let that be. There was also some places in the book where I felt like I just sort of jumped right into the topic, but I didn't really make a nice introduction into why this would appeal to a James Bond fan. Meaning, when I got into volume 2, I was conscious of the fact, like, for example, Blackjack. I write about Blackjack in volume 2. And when I talked about poker in the first one or some other things, I had some Fleming quotes where he had dipped into these things to sort of kick off the chapter to make a connection why a potential James Bond fanatic would be interested in these things. Blackjack, I didn't have a Fleming quote to use, so I kind of flourished a little bit and talked about the scene in License to Kill. So basically, I kind of got creative in some of my intros talking about how James Bond did this thing. In Horseback Riding, I make a reference to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. There's a few places where this happens. I talk about the bungee jump from GoldenEye a little more creatively. This is my very careful way of saying I didn't exactly delve into the realm of fan fiction, but what I did was just write about the fact that James Bond had done these things and tried to put a little creative flair on it. That was another big part of what I thought was missing in the first volume, and why I wanted to revisit that.
You mentioned on your podcast recently, and you just touched on it right now, that the last 3 Craig Bond films are very London based. So similar to like the Monorail trilogy, for you, does this form like an unofficial London trilogy of Bond films now that you've been working on that chapter?
Kind of, yeah. That is an interesting way to say it. I do feel that the last 3 were, I think Skyfall started something, and I don't know if they planned to stick with this, but I think once they had done it, they realized they didn't want to go back. But I think Skyfall, again, the whole motif, there's a lot of subtext about whether or not James Bond is still valid, still relevant in the world today. And I think that extended more into the UK. Where's the UK's standing in the world? And I think through that, they ended up doing, again, sort of a love letter to London and the UK in Skyfall. And I think once they did that, they had thrown down the gauntlet and they did not want to go back, and they kept Bond very London based in Spectre and No Time to Die, and I think that was a conscious decision. So yeah, I do sort of see that a bit where the last 3 films have been very much sort of a tribute to London and England itself.
They kind of foreshadowed that with Quantum of Solace, because there were all those title cards, the locations, and even in that movie, they showed London a little bit more than they had in sort of like earlier Bond movies. I remember one time they had said London and it was really raining. It gave, it's like in earlier Bond movies, you didn't really, you didn't have M with an umbrella, or that kind of stuff. Right. And yeah. I mean, but it's not as much as with Skyfall in the later films, but that was kind of a foreshadowing. It was, I wonder if it was in the back of their mind even then.
Very possible. I mean, it was actually kind of funny. There was sort of an irony when I wrote the first book. I mean, when I was doing podcasts, and I had, like, back in the day, I had a message board on my website, and the message board, before social media kind of kicked the crap out of it, it was actually doing gangbusters. It was great. And
I used to be a member.
Yeah. And most of the locations that Bond had been to had a place, on the message board. So I had a list of all the places I knew Bond would eventually visit. I remember doing the first volume, I thought, well, London is the most logical starting point. So I figured that had to be the first place that we would visit in the first book. But ironically, I found it to be a little bit of a challenge doing that the first time around, because, all of the Bond films, I mean, how many of the Bond films have establishing shots of Big Ben and Parliament before Bond gets his mission and then gets on a plane and goes somewhere else? There was not a lot of real London locations. I mean, I was reaching into the books. I'm writing about George Lazenby posing on the lamppost, to try to find places that you'd want to visit as a Bond fan in London. But once the last 3 films came out, that was just a different animal. I mean, Skyfall alone, was rich with places to sort of peek at and visit. So yeah, it really did. The last 3 films really did change that whole subject for me.
How has your writing style and process changed between the 2 books?
That's a great question. I'll say this. It's funny when I did after finishing the 2nd volume and then going back to revisit the 1st volume. I found myself doing it much differently, and I kind of felt that my voice got much clearer. Or I suppose another way to say it is that I just reread some of the things that I wrote, and I said, I could have explain that a little bit better. I think for the most part, structurally, the way that I wrote, the way that I would tackle different subjects probably stayed the same. I think that there was probably places where I would just dive in a little more and flesh out certain areas a little bit clearer, if that makes sense. I always try to keep, for writing like this, I always try to keep it pretty conversational, where I'm sitting across from you and I'm just explaining the best I can how this works. So I'm trying to make it not so much an instruction manual, more just you and I sitting there having a conversation and me kind of sharing some of the insights or things that helped me to understand certain things.
What was the most fun chapter for you to write for volume 2?
Ooh, for volume 2. The one where I got the most carried away, so that's probably the most fun. I did so for the first book, in the good life topics that I had for being James Bond, the first one that I tackled was drinks and mixology. It was all cocktails, drinks, liquors, all that kind of good stuff. For the second one, it was more about food and wine, and that one it's almost like, once I opened the can of worms, they were just all over the place, and I just could not. If I have a weakness in my writing, is that I don't know where to pull things in and say, okay, I think people have enough here. You know what I mean? I kind of over deliver to the point where people are like, just, is this chapter ever going to end? So yeah, I mean, that one probably was almost a book on his own. I mean, you could talk about wine all day, you could talk about food all day, trying to make the connections to the things that James Bond has. I mean, it's funny too, because that's also a strange topic, because as much as we think of James Bond being just oysters and caviar, you read the books and it's like ham sandwiches with a lot of mustard. It's like, well, do people really want to hear about that? Probably not. So you have to sort of pick and choose how to tackle that. But that was probably the one where I really kind of went a little crazy and had a lot of fun with it, and talked about different experiences and things like that.
So I'm going to ask you
this.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Just one thing that popped in my head as you were talking. So you've researched things that Bond does, and I'm asking this because I play golf and do so terribly. So did you play? Were you already playing, or did you take lessons? How did you research that part?
Well, I did play. It's been a while. I'm ashamed to admit. In fact, I keep saying to people I would love to get back out there and play again. But I did used to play golf fairly regularly. I had my sea legs when it came to golf. It's really more about, at the end of the day, you're still researching and reading about what the experts tell you. So it was, again, all of the things that I had written about, I kind of had at least dipped my toes in, but it still does boil down to, you still need to crack the books and just find out what the experts say on this, that, and the other thing. And again, you're trying to make it so once I learn it myself, then I try to re-explain it the way I would explain it to somebody, or I would want it explained to me. So that was sort of the that was sort of how that came together.
You're a pretty busy guy, Joe, like all of us are. So how often do you find that you're able to put being James Bond into practice? And is that something that's second nature for you at this point?
Not nearly as often as I would like. It's more of a, put it this way. I when I first started this, it was funny. When I started writing this book, when I started the podcast, you're talking about a much younger man who, at the spur of the moment, can go play golf and get on a plane and do what have you. Now it's more a case of let me ask my wife. So it's like it's at the end of the day, it does, you're just kind of living regular life like a regular guy after a little while. But again, I do find it's always a nice thing. Like I was out with some friends just the other night, some Bond friends, and we went to see On Her Majesty's Secret Service was playing on the big screen, not too far from where we are. And one of the things we went to dinner, and over dinner I said, what we have not done in a long time is had a poker night. I said, we're kind of overdue for a poker night. It's always great to have these things kind of in your back pocket where if something comes up, if somebody says, let's play poker, let's play golf, I got it. I at least know how to do this. Yeah, I can remember being much younger, the first couple times playing golf and just having no idea what I was doing. It just feels a little nicer when and again, some of this just comes with age too, but it always feels a little nicer when you're able to say, yeah, I actually know how to do that. I don't have to just constantly be the guy going, what do I do now? How do I do this? That kind of thing. So yeah, do I have the opportunities as much as I used to? Not quite, but it still becomes something. Put it this way, it's a little bit of you have to make a conscious decision to say, I will do these things, when I can. I will make time to do some of these things.
And if my back's up to it.
Well, yeah, exactly, right. Right. Sometimes just physically, it's not as easy as it was when we were younger. But yeah, I would still say that to this day, I still consciously do make time for a lot of these things when I can. And again, sometimes it's a conversation with the wife, but she's reasonable.
Well, I'm going to be that guy, and I'm going to ask you this, Joe. Do you see yourself writing a volume 3 once the Amazon series gets a few movies under its belt? And are there any attributes of being James Bond that you've yet to cover?
Oh, there's definitely attributes that I have yet to. I'm trying to think. I mean, the answer is absolutely. There's always things yet to do. Again, I'm not going to claim that I've conquered every single thing that James Bond has ever done. I wouldn't have the chutzpah to try that one. But a lot of them I've dabbled in, but still need to, be able to. I wouldn't feel comfortable yet writing about it until I've played with it some more. But like for example, I believe I've played Baccarat maybe once or twice on a very low stakes board table. But again, to be able to write about it, I would probably need to really kind of learn that one much better. I do see volume 3 in the future, and you're bringing up a good question. Once the new films start up again, that's always a thing too. I'm always sort of on the lookout. Is he gonna? Actually, a funnier way to say this, I remember when when Die Another Day came out, and I saw James Bond surfing and fencing.
Yeah.
I said to myself, this is where you know that they're really scratching the bottom of the barrel at this point to find things he has not done yet, because they're trying to, bring in some new things that we haven't seen before. And I kind of felt like, surfing is not what I would have associated with James Bond, but okay, the fencing works better, I think. But yeah, when the new films come out, I will definitely be on the lookout to see if there's things that I might have to introduce to being James Bond that maybe, I hadn't thought about before. I would almost assume at this point, just talking now about cinema rather than activities. But I would think that the new films will probably try to recapture some of the classic Bond, and you'll probably see him doing some things again that we've seen him do in the past. I think that's just kind of my prediction, but that is a possibility that there might be some new things to come.
Well, one possible thing is driving race cars. Now, it appeared in an Anthony Horowitz book, but that passage was originally written by Fleming. And, it's like, I'll have to admit my eyes rolled a bit because I'll spare you the details. I was in an indoor karting track, and I was on there with a bunch of professional race drivers. This is one of the most humiliating experiences in my life. It's like playing a game of horse with, NBA All-Stars. Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
I tell you this, one of the things that I find fascinating is that we are kind of living in a world where there's a lot of those experiences that were almost impossible. There's a lot of places where you can do these now, and I kind of find that interesting. I remember years ago reading, when Paul Cariazzi kind of came out with his book about living the James Bond lifestyle, and I remember reading it, or listening to it rather, and he said something about what if about trying to figure out what your fantasies would be and making them real, and he mentioned swimming with dolphins, and then he pauses and he says, what you think swimming with dolphins is impossible? Well, there's a place. And I remember thinking, like, in the years since then, like, every resort's got, you can swim with the dolphins. It's not a big deal anymore. And there's a few places, things that are like that. I've researched astronaut training, and I remember thinking, like, boy, a grand finale would be astronaut training, because of Moonraker and stuff. And sure enough, there are places that will teach you things and take you up in zero G's. It's not cheap, but you can do it. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of venues to learn these things.
Yeah, well, I remember for your 50th birthday, you went skydiving, didn't you? So maybe maybe for your 60th.
There you go.
We'll send Joe into orbit. That'll be a good one.
Well,
exactly.
Well, he doesn't have to go into orbit. Just go up on the Vomit Comet, where they
right
they take a severe dive, and it simulates zero G's.
Yeah.
And what do you think is your most Bond-like experience?
That's hard to say. I would still fall back on the bungee jump, the GoldenEye bungee jump, and I feel like a lot more people have done it since then. But I remember at the time thinking I was kind of pioneering and probably one of the first to ever try it.
I remember on the podcast, and I think it's probably in the book. You tell a whole story about hiring a car and going to the dam, and I think it's a great story.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and that would to me was sort of a no-brainer as far as how to sort of kick off the book with that story, because again, it was a great one, because the first time I tried it, it was such an absolute disaster, so it made for a funny story, and then there's a little bit of redemption in the end, when I actually did it the right way and went back and actually did it. So I probably for several reasons. I always find that sometimes all of the I'll say it this way, some of the biggest Bond feelings and experiences that you have a lot to do with traveling, and have a lot to do with the locations and kind of reliving some of those things in foreign places. And so I felt like the bungee jump was sort of like a combination of all of them, because I'm traveling through Switzerland to the site where this happened, doing the actual stunt, which was, again, still, I believe it's still the record. I think it still holds the record for the stationary jumps anyway. So yeah, I mean, that to me probably still takes it. But I've definitely had some incredible experiences, probably related to traveling, that really kind of just, again, will stick with me. I mean, the Honor Majesty's trip, 5 years ago was just absolutely mind-bending how incredible that was. So, and that was one, little argument with the wife about, can I go do this? And but it was like I did not want to miss that one, so I said that's got to happen.
Yeah. But one of the things you were saying a little bit earlier was that these experiences are far easier to have, but if you go back to the books, in Ian Fleming's day, travel was almost unthinkable for most people in the UK. And
Yes.
When he first started writing, the UK still had rationing, and so all these meals that appear in the books were they were unimaginable to most people in the UK as well. So I think that that was always one of the big attractions, I think, of Bond, because of the travel and the meals and all this kind of stuff that seemed impossible. But how, as things become more accessible to people, how do the filmmakers try and stay ahead of that?
That is the question, isn't it? That's one of the reasons why I keep wondering. I'm thinking that the answer. I'm thinking I already know the answer, I think. But if you asked me just recently, do I think that they're going to make films in the present day, or will they revert back to period pieces? I would have been kind of 50-50 and said I could see them easily going back to period films, because I feel that, first off, period stories, I mean, stories that take place, I don't care if you're talking about the 80s or you're talking about Swords and Shields, there are so many films, long-running TV shows, the long-form streaming shows that we have that take place in different times. And I feel that part of the reason for that is because we've become so modernized and so kind of pampered as a culture that it's hard to write dramatic adventure stories that take place in the modern day. I mean, I feel like I see so many different sort of detective things or mysteries that happen even as recent as like the 80s, because, how do you write a mystery story today? Well, you just go check the guy's phone and look at his Google searches and, that's it. So yeah, the question is very valid. How does James Bond still retain that wonderful fascination with things like travel and fine dining and all that good stuff when it is so readily available? As recently as, not recently, I suppose, but relatively recently, I mean, Dr. No spends a lot of time focusing on the fact that he's on a plane. Look, he's in an airport. Like, this was sort of a big deal back then. And yeah, it's kind of lost on us today. So I'm not sure how you do that, but I think if they try to downplay a tiny bit, even if they don't go full blown, we're going to set this in the 50s and 60s. If you dial things down a little bit, try not to be we don't have to compete with the Marvel films and be the next blockbuster. But I think if we do something that is more focused on mood and style, and it's more of a thriller than necessarily just a popcorn chomping film, I think you can bring back. I mean, there's some films that do that very well. I still say today, I look back, I think of like Ocean's 11, the remake with George Clooney. I think of Thomas Crown, the Pierce Brosnan version. I mean, these are films that really do focus on a certain lifestyle, and they do it effectively. So I think if the filmmakers keep that in mind, they can help to recapture some of that.
I'm going to change tacks with you just a little bit, Joe. We mentioned at the top of the show that you've been doing this for quite some time, and you've been a key part of the fan community. And especially when you look at, leading up to and during the pandemic, like those were, challenging times for the entire world. And we saw, obviously, we had podcasts like yours and James Bond and Friends and From Tailors with Love. And we had online events that, David Zaritsky hosted. And you saw like this community build. There were watch-alongs on Twitter of the movies to keep ourselves occupied. So we're 5 years removed from that now. And how do you feel like the Bond community has changed post-pandemic? Is it still tight-knit? Is it people are getting occupied by other things, so it's a little spread out now that we don't have something to focus on at the moment?
Yeah, that's a That is a fascinating question, and I think that the pandemic, and again, not trying to put lipstick on a pig or anything, but I think the silver lining of the pandemic was that the Bond community did sort of rally and kind of take shape a little bit more than previously. I feel that every fandom has their fans, and a lot of them are big enough to do fan events and that sort of thing. And I think for quite a while, the Bond sort of fan events were few and far between. I mean, I'm thinking of conventions way back when, but I mean, I think I have to go back to the 90s to even think of some of the bigger ones that I can recall. And I think they seem to have gone away for a little while, but I think that the pandemic sort of showed that there was sort of a need for fan community, for fandom to be able to get together and again celebrate the thing that we love so much. And I think a lot of that turned into things like Gatherall and that sort of thing. The 007 UK has done a tremendous job. I think they've really kind of brought new life to fans over on the other side of the pond. So yeah, I think it's actually it's becoming kind of a very exciting time to be a fan again. I do think that was part of it. You know, the pandemic was funny because I was stuck at home. I'm home and not going to work. So all of a sudden I've got just tons of time to create content. So I was like, I'm just doing, tons of content, and between live events and just putting out these big gigantic videos that because I have the free time to do it. Then of course real life kicks back in, and then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I have to go to work now. Okay, well that's not as fun. But yeah, no, I do think the residual impact was that it just kind of proved that we all wanted to be able to get together again and do some events. And again, some of them have been off the hook. So, and I'm kind of just excited for what's happening. I'm even, it's funny. For me, this summer has been kind of the summer of Bond, because I've just got kind of lucky in terms of like we've had showings of some of the films nearby, so we've gotten together for that. Nice. A couple people nearby have done a few things like that are kind of off the radar, not big enough to but like but again, just nice enough that I've been able to do a lot of fun things this summer, and yeah, hopefully I think that'll just get better.
You have two events coming up. One for Expanded Volume 1 and another for Volume 2. Tell our audience about them.
So the official kickoff for the new edition of Volume 1 is August 16th. I'll be in Yardsley, Pennsylvania, where we're going to have a lunch and kind of a kickoff event for the book. The book goes live, I believe pre-orders will start about August 4th. But yeah, the official kickoff is going to be the 16th, and that should be a lot of fun. And it was interesting the way this all sort of played out, because, last year I told myself, and again, family life and all that good stuff and work, have not been able to travel to Bond events for quite some time. So I told myself last year, I said, well, I'm doing at least one trip this year. David Zrisky said to me, he says, if you have just one to pick, I would definitely do the October event in London and go see Cue the Music. And I said, done. That sounds good to me. And so it sort of began to grow from there, where at some point he said to me, he says, are you planning to do a kickoff of Volume 2? I said, well, I hadn't really thought about it. And he said, well, why don't we do something that weekend? And we can kick off Volume 2 that Saturday, the day before the Cue the Music event. Of course, I lit up and thought that's absolutely incredible. So that was how that came to be. So in October, the day before the Cue the Music event, yeah, we're gonna have a kickoff at the Hippodrome on that Saturday, which is the 11th, the October 11th. The concert being the 12th. So yeah, I'm really pretty excited about that. But then the other thing is, I also was saying, so how do we do, do I do something about the kickoff for Volume 1? And it was basically, the answer was, well, why don't we do something for volume 1, but we'll keep it a little more lower key. I said, that sounds perfect. So David had a few things happening in August. We have a screening of Thunderball that Saturday night, and the afternoon that Saturday just happened to be free. And so we said, why not put a lunch together? So we'll do that. So so there's a kickoff lunch in Yardley, PA, a place called The Vault, which is pretty amazing. We went there and gorged ourselves on some of the food that they're going to serve that day. I said I feel like a bridesmaid checking out the reception hall, where they feed you, fill you full of food, to try to get you to. So it worked for me. So that's basically how that kind of transpired. So I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to do that in August in Yardley, PA. Just kind of a lunch, kickoff conversation about the book and all that good stuff.
And one quick thing, it's been more than 5 months now since Eon announced it was ceding creative control to Amazon. We have a director in place, but not a whole lot more. I mean, producers were obviously named before that. What was your initial reaction, and have your feelings kind of evolved over the months?
About the Amazon thing?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say I've gotten much. I think, put it this way, I was fairly optimistic when I heard about the takeover. And I think now I'm feeling more like my optimism was probably well-founded. I think when you first heard Amazon was purchasing the rights, a lot of people started to panic and said, does this mean we're going to get like Bond as a streaming show now? And I was pretty dismissive. I said, I highly doubt it, because why would you do something so dismissive with that property? And once you heard the director, once you heard Denis Villeneuve, you just said, okay, there you go. I mean, that's it. They're going to swing for the fences and try to do something pretty spectacular. So again, nothing is carved in stone until we're sitting in the theater watching the final product and we can see, what's transpired. But just based on what I know so far, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm again, both fingers crossed that they understand Fleming. That's sort of my thing. Is I really hope they understand the thing about James Bond that makes him unique. He's not just an action hero. He's not Jason Bourne. He's not Mission Impossible. I hope they really grasp what makes Bond unique. But again, with what I know, I'm feeling fairly, pretty good.
On top of everything you mentioned, Amazon actually went to CinemaCon, which is this annual thing in Las Vegas for the theater owners. And they outlined plans. They want to make 15 or 16 theatrically released movies a year, which they haven't done for years. And so, I mean, Amazon MGM wants to be a real studio again, it would seem. So I think that reinforces that. I mean, Bond is, everyone in the Bond community cares about, the next Bond movie, of course. But I think Amazon really wants, MGM to be an actual studio again. So I mean, we'll see. But that's just an additional side note.
And that's actually an interesting point too, because I also felt that when people heard Amazon MGM, they heard Amazon, but they didn't seem to pick up MGM. And I kind of thought like MGM is a respectable studio that's been around for generations. So I think if I think we're in pretty good hands when you think of it that way.
And I think like the model's just kind of shifted.
I don't know about you, Joe, but sorry, Javi.
I was gonna say, I think the model's just kind of shifted, because we did, like, going back to like the pandemic, where streaming became king and people were spending all that money on their streaming platforms and trying to get, people to subscribe to them. But it wasn't a sustainable model for any of the studios, and they've really scaled back. I mean, look at Disney Plus and how they're scaling back Marvel. And with this summer in particular, like everything is like film for IMAX or go see it in 4DX, and trying to bring that theatrical spectacle back, like with the last Mission Impossible movie. they realize they're leaving money on the table by cutting out that theatrical experience. So I'd like to think it's pretty safe that Bond's going to be in the cinemas for a little while longer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, to your point, it's funny now that you're saying that, because I'm having flashbacks of the post-pandemic years when every time a new big film would come out, people would say, "Is this going to be the one that's going to save cinema?" And I sort of feel like I feel like cinema is back for the most part. I don't know exactly when it happened. It was sort of slowly and gradual. Maybe not. I can't think of one particular film that did it. But it does feel that I totally agree with you. The model was probably never sustainable, and they really put a lot of eggs into that basket, didn't they? Where they really thought streaming was going to be just the new thing, and we were all just going to stay home and be happy watching it on our TVs. But yeah, I think people are craving the cinema experience again, and I'm really hoping
Netflix was the one that cracked the nut, and but then everybody chased them, and then it's like they found out it's really hard to do.
There's only so many subscriptions you can get.
Yeah, right. And now you've got one, you're paying a monthly fee so the whole entire family can sit here and watch this show or this movie instead of all going to the theater and paying for the ticket. And then, I mean, how many, probably all of us have done it where, oh, I'll pay for this one for a month or two because I want to see that show, and then I cancel it, maybe I'll try a different one and maybe I'll cancel that, etc. So yeah, I don't see it being very sustainable. And I don't think people ever wanted to pay through the nose just to watch TV again, the way we used to do it for free.
Okay. I'm going to put a pin in it. Joe, thanks very much for being here, and best of luck with both the expanded Volume 1 and the new Volume 2.
Absolutely.
And good luck on both events coming up. Javi and David, anything you want to add?
Just what I said at the beginning, that I followed Joe's work for a long time, and it's from the start he always blew me away with the quality of what he's done. So I look forward to Volume 2 of Being James Bond.
Javi?
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to get to like the Piz Gloria chapter and read about it again. And this has been a long time coming. So I know there are a lot of people that have been looking forward to it and asking you about it. And do you guys have any more reviews without remorse coming this summer?
Wow, it's funny you mentioned that one, because I literally just this morning, I literally apologized to Ray and Kyle and said that I've kind of been very, very lax with those podcasts recently, only because I've been focused so hard on the last two books. I'm actually trying, literally as we speak, scrambling to put the audiobook version together for the redo of Volume 1 to try to get that finished in time for the kickoff. So I have been a little slack with that, but we actually literally just finished. We talked about Legends of the Fall, and that will actually be out tomorrow. As of this recording, it'll be out tomorrow. So that'll be out soon. And yes, we are going to try to keep going with that. And I'll try to pick up the slack on that one.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks everyone. Thanks, Joe, for participating. Thanks.
Thank
Javi
you guys so
David.
much for having me. And it was a thrill to be back here again. It was really nice to be talking to you guys again. So thank you so much.
You on, yeah.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you. Like I said, this is the start of our season 3, and I suspect we'll get into some of the Bond anniversaries this year.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Anyway, thanks again. This has been Bill Koenig along with Javi Trujillo and David Leigh, with our guest Joseph Darlington, and we will see you soon. Take care.